Welcome everyone. I'm here today with Navot, a good friend of mine and a wonderful GM, and we're here to talk about a subject that you've all encountered when you build worlds and when you run games. It's religion, and each god and deity in your games has his own set of rules and things that he asks of his people or clerics or basically anyone he likes or dislikes for many reasons. And we're here to talk about that and make them more apparent in our games. So, first question to you, Navot. First, welcome and thank you for joining me here today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm a game master for circa 20 years. I've been playing since I was 13 and I just grew up with the hobby. The community here in Israel is very accommodating to trying out new things, and I had the pleasure of mixing and matching many things. Also, I'm a semi-trained historian, and I take great pleasure in blending the arts of crafting worlds and learning about our own.
Wonderful. So, what do you think is the main difference when we talk about religions, between religions in our world and religions in a fantasy world, or any made-up setting?
Well, the very biggest and most pronounced difference is the fact that religiosity in fantasy games, D&D, is that clerics can and will slap you with the truth of their divinity and divine patron in the face, whether it by healing your wounds or laying down a holy smite on someone. And that difference in efficacy of verisimilitude of truth to the claims of divinity and divine intervention and interest in the lives of lowly mortals is something we sorely lack in our modern world.
You don't see a lot of people revived by gods in our world.
No, those claims tend to stick around for very short whiles.
But
And this is the major difference, and we have to take it into consideration. Or we don't have to, but we can, and that helps in rounding out the way a world is shaped when we present it to our players, when we think about the logic of how things work in the world, how societies are shaped, how things are made.
all right. So thinking that and moving it even further, what is your thought process when you create a god or a divinity or anything?
First off, the very basic thought process starts with why. Why do I put this element in the game? I might not need it. Some games, while they have gods and they have clerics, D&D, the 5th edition, had very easily did away with the gods, sort of, and made with domains, which essentially means your cleric barely has any god to interact with. It has a domain, and it works by that domain, which can be ascribed to any number of gods. So we did away with the divine. So first off, do I want this element in my game? If I want religiosity to take part in my game, the second question is, how does it meet my characters, the player characters, and what sort of an effect do I want it to have in the game? It's a thought process of why and how does it meet my players through the characters.
I mean, when they build their characters or during the game sessions or like...
First off, how does it come? How does it encounter my players' characters in the game session post character creation? Character creation is a very wide topic, but it is also hugely important to remember that the campaign, the game itself, leaves the character creation behind, and in my own point of view, it is left behind. We mine it for plot hooks, for references, to enrich the world based on what our players give us as raw materials, but eventually character creation is left behind.
Yes.
The players should meet religiosity in the game through their characters. How does it happen? And here comes the not so divine. Here comes the human part of religiosity, and this is something I think should be remembered. We, as the humans who play the game, love to blame gods for our successes as well as our mistakes. Whether a blacksmith hammers his own thumb while crafting a sword and curses either a god of mischief for his own folly, or blesses the all hammer, the forge father, the whatever god, for him not breaking his thumb and merely reminding him to pay attention to his work. We love to blame them for everyday happenstance, and in our fantasy world, these everyday happenstances might actually have some sort of a connection, and us ascribing through our characters these happenstances to the divine beings in the world is how we players encounter religiosity. This is the first encounter.
So through other characters in the setting that talk about gods and
Yes.
react to the lifestyle of being religious and
First off, it can come
blaming, like you said.
Here's the rift. Me as a game master and a storyteller, I give my players other characters, and I'm trying to teach them through NPCs and encounters how the world acts. So if I put bless the Everlight, says the elf as he shoots down an orc, very well. If another elf and then another one, bless the Everlight, I teach my players through NPCs about the importance of the Everlight to the elves. They say it in certain times. I would like, if my character party has an elf from that specific culture, to repeat that sentence. I would like it to use it. This is an everyday encounter. This brings the players into the world and enhances immersion. Now, there's another part. This is mortals talking about divinities. What happens when divinities talk about mortals? Then we have the manifestations. In our world, most polytheistic religions that I have researched have some concept of a divine, of something of surpassing capability, omniscient, omnipotent, and often utterly impersonal. They don't care.
The force of creation that's
The Romans had
everywhere.
fortune. The Greeks had something almost to the same name. Various other polytheistic religions and beliefs have some sort of an understanding that the universe might be aware and potent and can do just about whatever it wants, but it doesn't care about us, mortals. We have other manifestations of divine providence, like gods, say Zeus or Jupiter in the Roman mythology, that are more interested in us. We affect them, they affect us, they espouse certain things. It might be colors, it might be beasts, it might be certain types of actions. Juno, or the Roman goddess of marriage and matrimony, espouses fidelity, and which means if you are in wedlock and you're loyal to your spouse, for a long time, she might look upon it with favor. Or she might be the wrathful sort of a goddess, which she often described as. And when you break your fidelity, as her husband Jupiter often does, she comes in wrath after all those who broke the locks of matrimony. So, we have a god that certain actions of mortals or close to mortal beings can move to action.
So they unlike the higher up, if we build a divine hierarchy, like I think we are,
Yes.
there's this all-powerful force that is often irrelevant to believers. It's not worshipped outright, if I'm correct.
While it may be, we do not expect anything out of it.
But
And in a universe where revivification is a third level spell, which happens rather often, you can assume that the players and the characters are more interested in what happens close to home.
so that would be the gods.
That would be the gods, and even not the gods, their manifestations.
What are the manifestations then?
Manifestations are sort of a go-between. Think about them as angels, death knights, beings of clearly divine potency, but very limited scopes. For instance, you can think about Gabriel in the last series, Good Omens. Gabriel doesn't know the ineffable plan. Gabriel doesn't even know when Armageddon is going to happen. But he has a very specific role, and within that role in the divine plan, it has nigh omnipotence. It is unbeatable in combat. It has nigh on omniscience about this specific role. Now let's move from Christian mythology and to a more fantastical one. Say you have the Dark Elf series, and you have there an orc, which was chosen by Grumsh, the one-eyed, the god of orcs. And he is blessed by it. He acts as a divine champion. He cannot be beat. He is nigh omnipotent in his role as the avatar of Grumsh. He brings war wherever he goes. That's a manifestation. That's a go-between. That's something that the characters can recognize. Grumsh favors red, so that orc always wears red. He only has one eye. He has fought many wars, so he's scarred all over. He is an embodiment. Now, this orc rose through the ranks to become a manifestation, as opposed to an angel descending from heaven and becoming a manifestation. Mm-hmm. It can come from anywhere. But these characters embody what we think about God. So we have, let's take for instance, Zeus. Okay, Zeus Lepidus, Jupiter Lepidus, the god of the rock, the god of justice. And he, obviously, Jupiter of the rock, espouses rocks and justice. So if we take a manifestation, we'll take a judge, very well kept, very ostentatious, and yet very clean. And we give him a rock of judgment on which he carves down everlasting decrees. Okay? And we have a manifestation. And now the characters, when they see in a local lawmaster's house a certain rock inscribed with a decree, we know it connects through the links all the way up to the manifestations of the judge upon the rock, which is a manifestation of Jupiter Lepidus. Mm-hmm. We are building connections and forming, essentially, a story. And next time a thief wants to look like a good follower, he will carry a little rock with the rune of justice on it, and he will show it around deceptively tying himself to a god. Now, that religion might decree that carrying that religious symbol while acting in a duplicitous manner might have some ramifications that can be anything from shame on you for shaming our god to excommunication and outright blood hunt.
Yep. That happens. You shamed our god, and now you shall be smitten by his servants.
Yes, and a paladin will go around and holy smite you.
Yep. Smite!
There should be smite!
Love it.
Yes.
So we have the image of the gods and the manifestations, and now there's the image of our worshippers, the people who live their lives and approach this. There's a lot of divine to go through, and obviously they'll go to whatever is closest to them, being the manifestation that is around them. But how would you approach that when you build a world? How would you approach the worshippers?
I would approach religions as problem solvers. Every god has things it likes, things it doesn't like, and things that are connected to it. In most polytheistic religions, people think about their gods as contractors. It's a bit weird because we're living in a world in which most people don't think about the gods as someone that can be bound or entreated even. But again, we'll go back to Jupiter Lepidus. Let's say I live in a city which is ruled not theocratically, but the lawmaker is a religious position.
Okay.
Because they worship Jupiter Lepidus and how it works. They write down decrees and they carve it in stone. So decrees, now we have a city of people following the decrees of the stone father, and let's say they're dwarves, and they have monumental columns, pillars, and they chisel the laws on them. And so as our characters explore the city, they encounter it. They see it in the streets. The laws are there for all to see and understand. They are kept, they might even be translated to different languages so that visitors and foreigners would not claim to not know the laws they now live under so long as they remain within the city. You have dwarves walking around. There are contracts. You want to buy a sword, that's wonderful, that's a contract. And every such contract is signed by the sign of Jupiter Lepidus. Mm-hmm. Under the, let's say, it's dusted with obsidian dust, which is provided by the temple, and this obsidian dust upon the stone or clay tablet that the contract is made signifies this the hallowedness of this contract. And contracts are hallowed, which means an oath breaker is not just a social crime, it's a religious crime. And this is how I would build the interaction. I would think, first and foremost, what would my characters, what my player characters would encounter. And I would go to any player that shows such interest as to, okay, I want to play a cleric. I want to play a devout person. What do I know about the gods from the culture where I come from? And I would suggest taking tokens of these religions and those beliefs into the character. Maybe it is tattooed. Maybe it carries a blue scarf on Friday. I don't know, to signify it is available for courtship. because the goddess of love dresses in blue, and every Friday you wear your blue scarf, and that means you're available.
So you encourage the players to take, like you said, habits and other things that they can derive from the manifestations and the gods that they represent, and bring them into the game through their character, through their religious character.
That's the character players, and the player characters are obviously the NPCs. Again, I will think, what do the player characters can perceive? If I am not running an overly religious campaign, I would shy away from trying to overdevelop everything. I would make whatever is needed for that specific part. I would much rather to have 16 different interesting tidbits to dazzle my players with, and let them choose where they want to go and develop it there.
Yep.
I don't have to explain all 15 blades of the Dark Knight.
Nope, that's true. Develop it around the players' choices and what they wish to do and the things they wish to expand upon and explore.
Like in strategy games, there's the fog of war. And I can always open up whatever perception my players go. They move on my map.
Yep. So the same is true for religions. We go and we can say that there is a certain god in our game, and they've met one manifestation at one place, and they go travel around to another city and meet a whole different manifestations with different values that
Quite
treat things differently.
They went from the dwarf hold of Jupiter Lepidus and moved up the mountain and encountered a tribe of storm giants worshipping Jupiter Fulgor, Jupiter of lightning. It's a completely different god, or is it? Both are Jupiter. One of them is wrathful and decisive and strikes down the enemies with thunderbolts. And the other one is just and stable. Both of them are faces of the same, or facets of the same god, different manifestations. And you might see clerics from the giants tribe and the dwarven tribe argue, or they might communicate and decide, okay, you worship this facet, we worship that facet. You smite down the enemies and fight with the dragons, according to the ancient feuds, and we're the dwarves supplying you with weapons, and we are all blessed by Jupiter.
Interesting. That's a good take on expanding religions and throwing them from one place to the other and see how they evolve in a fantasy game, because that's the case in our world many times, that you see, correct me if I'm wrong, you see religions move from one place to the other, and you can almost tell where they came from and which habits came from where, and how they differ depending on which aspects this culture chose to put on a pedestal and worship.
A very good instance of the breadth of difference. Most of us used to think about Aphrodite as the god of love or maybe lust. But Aphrodite was also the protector of sailors and a major maritime goddess, which was worshipped in Egypt.
Huh.
So,
I didn't know that.
Yes. So, on one hand, we see lots of beautiful women statues ascribed to Aphrodite, but most of them also has some sort of maritime beast in them, a dolphin or a conch or some sort of fish. And it's not only because we have the Venus rises from the ocean myth, but because she was worshipped and sacrificed to for safety of sailors.
Okay. That's
So you have, on one hand, a goddess of love and lust, not necessarily matrimony, but the actual ideal of love and beauty. On the other hand, you have a goddess which is very practical. I want to be home after I go over to the ocean where it is very dangerous. These are combined in a way that seems somewhat unnatural to us modern thinkers, and yet in a fantasy world there's nothing better. Go back to our little building of Jupiter Lepidus and Jupiter Fulgo. We can say that on top of that mountain there's a stone known as the lightning stone, and it's made out of meteoric iron, and it draws lightning, and this is a holy site to Jupiter. And the dwarves espouse the stone, and the giants espouse the lightning, and they both come to celebrate 3 times a year in a great circle dance around the stone.
In the convention we held a few weeks back, you spoke about a game mechanic that makes the gods more apparent, and the divine in general, in our settings. Would you care to share it with us?
Of course. First off, mechanics are used to make things present in the game. By putting things on the table and on our character sheets and as something mechanical, we give it presence in our game. So long as something is not mechanical, so to speak, we can somehow ignore it. When we have a mechanic for something, we can expect the players to use it. This is the why. As for the how, it's simple. I, as the storyteller, look at my players, and when they use those cues I'm referring to the very beginning of our conversation, the cues, they say, bless the Everlight after they roll a natural 20, or shit, Balder stabbed me in the back when they roll a natural 1. Both are happenstances, but when they do that, I as a DM can choose to reach around, get one of my shiny baubles that I keep as tokens, and give my player a token of divine attention. Now the player knows it has a token, it's physical, it's on the table, that a god, if I am well prepared and I have color-coded gods, and I can give them an orange one for the Everlight or a black one for Balder, and suddenly he has a attention directed at its character then and there. So next time that the player does something like that, it can rack up attention tokens. I would recommend not giving more than 1 or 2 tokens per session, about 3 hours, so you won't have to keep track over that over much. But then it has a token. So the first effect is the player noticed that me as the storyteller noticed what he has done, referring in male for now, and can react to it. I have grabbed my player. While the character might not notice anything, the player knows. And this is a meta mechanic. Now, the character can notice things if I can, as a storyteller, say after the player has done something through his character that interacts with the divine intention. Say the Everlight, the elf, struck an orc down, and now few sessions later, or even later that same session, he tries to track the orcs via some sort of a tracking capability. I can take this token back and say that the god has favor of that action, and thus grants him some sort of a circumstance. Yep. Happens. One of the orcs was nicked in battle and now he's bleeding, and it helps. Mechanically, I am somewhat tentative about giving bonuses.
Like it could be advantage, or maybe even forgoing certain roles.
Yes, forgoing roles according to circumstance is better than advantage, because that sort of a reaction, in my opinion, does not make the players try to abuse. They don't know they had the advantage. They only know that the god acted by me withdrawing that token. Now,
So that they know when you take the token, they know that the god intervened in some way that helped them doing what they do.
or, and that's an important part, they might have earned the ire of God. If said orc, if said elf cursed Grumsh for the orc running away, Grumsh might have noticed that particular elf that has been harrying his forces over and over again, and now puts his one baleful eye upon the elf.
Oof. Multiple gods looking at the same person.
Polytheistic relationships are problematic, and there's a reason why bookkeeping was invented, and it probably was for the use of temples, but I'm moving way beyond the scope.
I, as a player, I have this pool of tokens that could be of one god or a few gods, and when I do something that you as a GM think that a god can intervene, you can take tokens or give me tokens if I do something that's
I try to give tokens on a player's action that blames or involves a god in their play. Thus, giving players that do not wish that sort of an attention, say players that want to play atheistic or agnostic characters. It's very hard to play an agnostic character in a fantasy world where people get revivified, and there's health spells everywhere, but they might not care for that sort of a game, the players, and I'm giving them an opt-out. If they do not curse the gods or blame the gods and merely say it's fortune or the whatever overarching presence of divinity, then they do not wish for that mechanic to be applied, and it doesn't. Because this mechanic is very important to be applied in both directions, both ire and favor. You have Grumsh loathing you for killing his orcs, and you have the Everlight blessing your arrows.
So tokens represent the attention that we get from them, not necessarily good or bad, only that they are aware of us and know about us.
Gods and their manifestations take interest in your character.
I see.
And as the tokens build up over sessions, remember I'm talking about 1-2 tokens a session, tops, to give it time to build. But if you build it up, say to 6, 7 tokens, and then the storyteller reaches out and grabs 6 tokens, and the manifestation appears out of nowhere to smite down the heretics or smite you down because you just killed his favorite Grumsh, noticed you killing his favorite warchief, and that warchief suddenly rises from the ground screaming in everlasting fury because Grumsh decided that this is enough.
Yeah, oof. That's nice. That's a really good use of that. So there's also, I suppose, other ways to gain tokens. If I perform, for example, a ritual, like run ritual to a specific god, like sacrifice thing.
I would suggest these activities be used more to balance the scales.
All right.
I'm a player. I do not want Grumsh's attention. I am playing an elf. I worship the Everlight, and I do not want to be hunted down by orcs. I do something to placate that god.
Grumsh?
For instance. Or I beseech the Everlight to withdraw Grumsh's attention from me.
All right.
However do I present it, because it's a complicated give and take contract. I might say I am not beholden to the Everlight. I am beseeching Grumsh to understand that might makes right, and I was mighty, so I am in the right of slaying his orcs, and he might accept it.
It's true. That's true.
I might beseech the Everlight.
Though the character wouldn't know.
The character would have to research that religion and figure it out.
I see. Right.
See, rites and rituals are essentially ways of characters beseeching the gods and asking them for boons or placating them for their misdeeds. I am throwing a huge lump of gold at you and telling you, look, what's done is done. Here's a gift.
Now, how clerics would go into that mechanic? How does it interact with them?
Suggest clerics and other religiously oriented characters, such as paladins for the most part, to have a certain amount of tokens with them. Now, be aware, clerics in regular fantasy are not essentially, they're not decidedly devout people. They know how to work divine magic to their way. And each storyteller has to explain what makes the difference between a patriarch of some sort of a temple that can cast absolutely no spells and is a level 1 peasant, which happens to be very charismatic, and what's the qualifying difference between him and the player character, level 19 priest that did very little in the way of said temple. How did it gain its
Divine,
borderline godlike capabilities of reviving people, showering fire and stone, or just speaking words that kill creatures of the dark? It's a qualifying question of a certain campaign. There's no mechanic for that. I would suggest that clerics would have some ties to the organization of religiosity of their god. That is an excellent hook. And giving them attention from that god when they stray or act well according to that god's decrees is very important. And by playing a cleric, I would assume that the player had opted in to that sort of an attention. 3 times as much for a paladin. Though the paladin has a different mechanic, the oath mechanic, which is
also interesting.
Slightly more binding than the attention mechanic I'm suggesting here. But I would also say that clerics should have more attention from the gods. I would say that they have a higher cap of how much attention they can garner at every point of the game.
Mm-hmm. So and you would cap it at a certain point for certain characters, but the cap would go higher.
I would say that without some very important factor, you would only garner that much attention as a general attention. You may well entreat a certain manifestation. If I go up to Lord Soth, the Death Knight, and say, I would like you personally to lead with me the armies of our god Orcus, you don't need attention points. You
need a persuasion roll.
You need a
or just be persuasive.
Be very persuasive.
or die.
Exactly, and be revived as one of the leaders under Lord Soth.
Yep.
But the thing is that the attention is more of a mechanic to allow players feel around their characters, and by rewarding certain behaviors of blaming and praising gods for things that happen, I am giving the players another way to interact with the world.
Wonderful. That's a really good mechanic. So, thank you very much for joining me here today.
It was a pleasure.
It really was. And I'm happy that you were here, and thank you for joining us today. We'll do more interviews like that in the future. If you like what's going on here, feel free to subscribe to the channel and tell us about your own religions in the comments, and share with us your stories. And we'll see you again in the next video. So until next time, see you beyond the screen.